Texas welcomes the Kentucky Wildcats to Austin, the final home game for Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns the 2024 season. Helping us break it all down, talk all things Texas. Good friend of mine, good friend of the show, CJ Vogel of OnTexas Football does a great job of covering the Horn. CJ, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time and excited to see you in just a few short days. My first ever trip to Austin, Texas. We were talking about this weeks ago, man. We finally made it.
It's here. Austin, Texas hospitality will be greeting you at the airport. We'll be greeting you down here in Austin. It's exciting. I'm glad you're making the trip. Hopefully, we got a good game for you this Saturday down here in Austin. Should be a good one.
Not too good of a game though, CJ. I've had some Texas folks push back on me a little bit. They're like, "Hey, you've been really good vibes for the home team, but leave some of that good game energy that you've been bringing with you behind." I think most Longhorn fans would like to see a covering of the spread this weekend, not a down to the wire battle with. Yeah, stress-free, exactly. Is it ever stress-free, though, when it comes to Texas? On that note of not being stress-free, CJ, this game last weekend against Arkansas, I want to get your takes on it because, I mentioned this, ironically enough, when you and I met up. It was in Nashville for that game against Vandy, and Texas got a hard-fought win. This previous weekend, you go into Fayetteville, a quote-unquote rivalry game. You go in, obviously, the history there with Arkansas, and you find a way to get a dub. I'll say what I said then in Nashville. I'll say it about this game too, CJ. And you know this. There's no such thing as a bad road win in the SEC. But certainly it was a game where, I think Texas fans look at it. There maybe a little bit of meat left on the bone. It wasn't quite the emphatic win you wanted. But still, in a game like that, a dub is a dub. What did you see from the Longhorns in that football game in the 10-point win over Arkansas?
Well, first and foremost, I have to agree with you, right? There's no bad wins in the SEC, and I think that's kind of the learning curve right now for not just Texas fans, but myself as well, right? You go into this game looking at the two previous games that Arkansas had hosted in Fayetteville, and you saw LSU score 48. You saw Ole Miss throw for 1,000 yards, almost have 75 points, whatever it was. You're looking at a bad secondary. You're looking at a team that quit defensively in 2 straight games at home. What you don't see is a win over Tennessee at home. You don't see the 4-point loss on the road to Texas A&M or in a neutral site to Texas A&M. You don't see the close fought games for Arkansas, a team that still has a lot of competitors, a lot of talent, a lot of ways that can score and keep games close. And I think that's one of the things, especially in a rivalry game with high intensity, high emotions. The Arkansas fan base surely showed out for that game against the Longhorns. They don't like burnt orange. They made that clear when I was on the field pregame. But the point being, Texas ended up winning the football game. It was a 10-point win. Could have been more had they decided to punch the ball in on that final possession. But you look at it in the sense of saying, hey, you left a road game in the SEC with the victory. There sure could have been more that you would have liked to have seen, especially in the first half. But at the end of the day, the job was accomplished. The mission, you're leaving back to Austin doing exactly what you wanted to do. And that's keeping your SEC championship hope games alive. And also, anything looking forward towards the college football playoff, that's still alive as well. That was the end all be all for the Texas Longhorns. And they ended up accomplishing that on the way to Fayetteville.
CJ, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I'm going to ask you again. Where do we sit right now with Quinn Ewers? I feel like we need like a meter for Quinn Ewers, like like sometimes we see like hot seat meter or whatever. We need like a Quinn Ewers temperature check, like on the weekly. You look at the stat line, it's nothing that's going to jump off the page at you, but it's a tale of 2 weeks against Florida. That the Texas offense looked as good as they had looked all year long, right? I mean, just sliced and diced in a 49-17 win. Against Arkansas, early it looked really good, and then it kind of staled out. Simply put, CJ, like where do we sit right now with Quinn? I mean, I'm not asking you that from the standpoint of, is it time to go to somebody? I think the conversation is crazy because I know you've been dealing with it all year long. I mean, I still hear and see Texas people saying that, we're not playing the best quarterback, and it does. I'm sure it gets exhausting for you fighting that battle daily. But where do you sit right now with Quinn Ewers, what you've seen from him in regards to the latest, and then going into this weekend against Kentucky?
I'll tell you what, that conversation doesn't get any quieter, any louder. It's remained pretty constant this entire season, especially since we saw Arch earlier this year. Mm-hmm. It was a frustrating day for Quinn. And I say that because Quinn's good anytime he's throwing the ball within 0 to 20 yards. We know that. The deep ball, hit or miss, it's been that way his entire career. But when you see him miss a 5-yard slant on 3rd and 8 that would have scored a touchdown. When you see him miss a check down on 2nd and 8 that would have been a first down that led you right into the red zone, that's the frustration, because you're not seeing him elude sacks. You're not seeing him extend plays. You're not seeing him hit the deep pass. You know what he is by now, and that's the guy that's going to kind of game manage, get the ball where it's got to go, let your guys create after the catch. And when he's errant in that regard, now you're sitting around thinking, okay, there's something really off right now, because what he's really good at is not showing up one. And when that's really his bread and butter, you're kind of having to sit back, reflect, and say, what do you have at quarterback right now? Now, to his credit, when Texas needed a drive to go up 2 possessions, what did they do? They put the ball in his hands. First play, 25-yard completion, touchdown to Matthew Golden later on a rollout, a perfect pass where only his wide receiver can make a play on it. A second, the drive right after that, 7 minutes to go to seal the deal. Texas ran the ball very efficiently in that game, but it's also Quinn Ewers putting his head down, lowering his shoulder, and finding a way to get the first down. So that's where you kind of find the balance. Is he doing enough? Yes. But will that enough be serviceable for Texas later on whenever they're facing an Alabama, a Tennessee, and Ole Miss? I don't know. And I think that this Texas team will only go as far as Quinn Ewers lets them. And so that was the frustration for me is, listen, he just had his best game of the year, maybe one of the best of his entire career against Florida. Now you're going up against an Arkansas secondary that had just gotten torched 2 straight weeks in a row, and you're punting 5 of your first 7 drives, and you don't really have any sort of offensive rhythm at all. 3 of them are 3 and outs. I know that Arkansas secondary with the 3-high look gave a lot of challenges, but at the same time, you're a 3rd-year starting quarterback in the same system. There should be ways that you overcome this. You've seen that 3-high look time and time again in the Big 12. It's no different than what it is now. Where is the adjustment? Where is the cape putting on if you're Quinn Ewers and being that Superman that everybody expected coming into the year? At this point, I think Quinn is who he is. And is that enough to win it all if you're a Texas fan? I don't know. But you can rely on that defense. And the one thing I will always commend Quinn Ewers on is he does not put the ball in harm's way very often. And that's one thing that I think Texas will be able to kind of build on is ball protection and relying on that defense to get them to where they want to go. But Quinn's going to be the kind of that meter. Whether or not they'll achieve the ultimate goal or they'll fall flat, I think it all depends on what kind of Quinn Ewers they get on a given Saturday.
CJ, I've heard that 3-high look mentioned a lot by you and other folks that cover the Horns. Simply put, you mentioned there's ways to beat it. What's the ways to beat it for Texas? What's the adjustment so that other teams, because again, like we're going to get in the Kentucky game in a second. Kentucky's not a very good football team. They do have defensive personnel, though, that could execute that plan. And, of course, we know what looms in about a week and a half or so. Is it simply establishing more of a running game? Is it something Quinn's got? Like, what's the key in your mind for Texas to – and, I mean, Steve Sarkisian knows all of this. It's not like we're saying anything he doesn't. But when you look at it, what's the key for Texas to start beating that 3-high look and keep defenses more honest? It's
that simple. Establish the run and keep consistent running game, keep the running game churning, right? Texas ran the ball 18 times in the first half. They went for about 57 yards. So, yes, they're running the football, but they're not doing it effectively, which then puts Texas in 3rd and long, predictable passing situations that play right into that cover 3-high look. And, it's tough to stretch the field vertically against that 3-high look. Texas hasn't really had success in it its entire time facing it since Sarkisian arrived. And what Texas and I thought Sark did a good job of is, hey, we're going 21 personnel 40 times against Arkansas. That was the most that we've seen a 2 tight end look this entire season. In years past, it was a 6-man offensive line coming in, and you could see them, kind of churning right behind that extra offensive lineman. They've relied on that second tight end this year when facing the 3-high, and in the fourth quarter, it ended up working, right? That was the most efficient offense that the Texas offense had looked. But at the same time, you got to find other ways to be efficient early in the game because, again, it was 10-0 at halftime. Your defense pitched a shutout, and still you're sitting there thinking, should be 24, should be 27. Texas should have a number of more points than what they have on the board right now, and it almost came back to bite them as we saw later in that second half.
CJ, you mentioned the defense. I want to talk about them for a bit because it does seem like they're getting forgotten in all of this because everybody wants to focus in on the offense and Quinn. How excited are you about that defense? Because I honestly thought if last weekend was going to be a close game, it was going to be because, Bobby Petrino's had 2 weeks to get ready, and we've seen Taylon Green and that group of receivers and Jaquin and Jackson at times when they get hot, they're able to put up points in bunches. But I feel like you got to be really excited about what you're seeing. Because, again, like you mentioned, maybe Quinn is what he is, but that defense also what it is, which I think is championship level at this point.
I think so as well. And it's funny. I'm sitting there in the press box talking to a couple folks during the game, and Arkansas drives down the field and they score a touchdown. We're all kind of looking around saying, that felt odd. And then, one of us makes the comment of, hey, that's a good offense. That's a good team. That's a team with, first-round wide receiver, 2 really good running backs, and one of the most elusive athletic quarterbacks that you'll see in the country. And it felt like a surprise to see them score at all, because that's kind of become the norm for this Texas defense to not allow points. And so you kind of have to sit back, reflect, and say, hey, they got good scholarship players on the other side as well. But to the point, I think this Texas defense is as good as we've seen since maybe 2005, 2006 at Texas. And that's when they were winning the Rose Bowl and hoisting a national championship game. And again, a lot of that was because of the quarterback play. That goes back to Quinn Ewers. But right now, the question coming in for Texas is what was going to be the weak spot. It was the secondary a year ago, but then you lose Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Jalen Ford, 3 guys in the front 7 that really helped establish what was the best running defense in the country. This year, it's kind of flip-flopped. Now you're letting your edges get after the quarterback. Now you're letting Jahdae Barron, Manny Muhammad, Andrew Makuba, Michael Taft in the back end establish what has been the best passing defense in the country. It's funny how that flip-flops on a year-to-year, but right now you kind of see the mold for which Texas wants to play football games. Get up early, take away the run game for opponents, and force them to throw the rock. And you see what happens when that's the case. Florida couldn't do it. Arkansas wasn't able to necessarily keep that passing game going all game, and it played right into the hands of the Texas defense, who had 6 sacks on Saturday.
CJ, let's turn our attention to this Kentucky game. And before we dive into, because I want to get your thoughts on the Cats, fans can, the beauty of it is this, CJ, we can look ahead. We can say whatever we want, right? It doesn't matter, right? So we could spend all week just talking about the A&M game, and it wouldn't matter because we're not in the building, we're not on the team. You cover this team, you're as close to them as anybody. Have you sensed any, you and I were just joking off air about the Mike Elko clip that dropped where he accidentally said Texas instead of Auburn, and people are like, how much of his focus is on this weekend? Do you sense any look ahead from Texas in the slightest? I would assume the answer is no, but I'm curious to get your take just because all the Texas folks I've been interacting with this week, and to no fault of them, everybody's looking ahead to next weekend. Like, I know it. Hard not to. But from the standpoint of this football team, level of focus, how would you gauge that right now?
Again, it's so hard not to, especially with the stakes of, is this a basically an appetizer for the playoff? Can you technically classify it as a playoff game? Loser goes home? I think so. But right now, and I was really encouraged from a Texas perspective from what Steve Sarkisian said on Monday in his press conference to open up the week. He said, listen, this is the most important. This is the biggest game that we're going to play all season long. Sure, it's coach speak, but if you get your locker room to buy into that and believe it, then you've done your job as a head coach, right? We laugh at Kirby Smart saying all the time that no one ever believed in Georgia when they went back-to-back. Sure. I mean, they only went wire to wire as the number 1 team in the country. But if you get your team to believe that inside the locker room, they're going to play at a different intensity and a different level of focus. And I think right now, that's the message being instilled in Austin, in that locker room at practice every day. And that's encouraging because, again, Kentucky, for their ups and downs this year, they've got NFL guys all over that defense. They can make life very difficult. They only lost to Georgia by 1. They beat Ole Miss. That trenches that the Wildcats have, they can play with just about anybody. It's everything else that kind of holds them back right now. So for Sark to kind of come out and establish, hey, this is the game that we're focused on, this is the biggest one that will make or break our season, that bodes well going into senior night where emotions will be high again for the Longhorns. And, you got to take care of the business one day at a time, one game at a time, and it starts with Kentucky on Saturday. I think this thing will be focused for it.
CJ, I know it's still sort of early in the week, but what you've seen from Kentucky and maybe from some of your early deep dives, what do you see from the Cats that'll be, maybe some areas of challenge for Texas that you'll be keeping a close eye on, and then some areas that you think Texas can exploit and take advantage of on Saturday?
Yeah, again, I start with that Texas run game. Will you be able to move the rock? I know that Texas offense line was expected to be one of the best in the country, and at times it has been, more so in pass protection than anything, but you're going to have to establish the running game at some point, and that means moving Deion Walker. who I think we all agree is one of the best interior defensive linemen, linemen in general in all of the country. Outside of him, Dumas Johnson at the linebacker position, really talented guy, player as well, coming over from Georgia. That front seven poses a lot of issues for me. And again, if it's one of those situations where Texas is unable to establish a consistent early run game, that's going to be an issue. Texas only had 2 rushes of 10 yards or more on 33 attempts against Arkansas. That's not going to cut it against a Texas A&M, a Georgia, and Alabama, whoever. That's not going to cut it. There has to be more consistency, and it starts against a team like Kentucky where you would hope there's some sort of rhythm established early in that game for the Longhorns. On the bright side, Quinn's played well at home so far outside of that Georgia game. I think that's one thing that if you give him time, you give him that familiarity, that comfortability in the pocket at DKR, it's something that's going to play into his advantage. And that should be something that gives Texas enough of a buffer for whatever happens in that game. Rely on Quinn, rely on that offensive scheme with Bolden, and Isaiah Bond to get the job done at home.
CJ, you just mentioned, I'll segue into this, key or keys to the game for Texas to not just win, because I think this is a game, CJ, where, I expect Texas to win. You do as well. Most out there, I would say, do 3 touchdown favorites. But key or keys for Texas to have the type of senior night that Longhorn fans are hoping for and to go into the A&M game with the most confidence possible.
It's almost as simple as this. Throw the ball to Isaiah Bond, and that sounds crazy, but only 2 games this year he has more than 5 targets. And I'm sitting there, I was doing the deep dive on Andrew Armstrong going into the Arkansas game. He is Arkansas's best player offensively. I don't think there's any question to it. He's second in the SEC in receiving yards. He doesn't have a game this year under 8 targets. He has more than half of his games with more than 10, and some of them up in 13, 14 range. That tells me that Arkansas knows what they have offensively. They value Andrew Armstrong to the extent where they're going to throw him the rock whether he's open or not because they trust that he's going to make a play. There's got to be some of that for Texas. And I don't necessarily think a lot of that falls on the shoulder of Steve Sarkisian, right? Some of it is, obviously, but we see him find ways to get Isaiah Bond the rock, right? It's the immediate slants, it's the bubbles, it's the screens. He's done well. He's got 2 touchdowns of 40 yards this year on screen passes alone. What that means to me is, hey, Quinn Ewers, you've got a really good wide receiver over here. Probably the fastest player on the field, probably a first-round wide receiver. You got to trust him. You got to make sure that he gets his looks. You find ways to get the ball in his hands down the field and in space because he's that level of player that with the ball in his hands, he can make magic happen out of nothing. So for 5 targets to go Isaiah Bond's way, that's far too short in my eyes. Get him the rock and find ways to create because he's as electric as they come. It's something that I think Texas hasn't done enough of this year.
CJ Vogel on Texas Football. CJ, I've mentioned many times that on this tour I've been on, the stops have only been as good as the tour guides I've had. And I know with you and the gang, I'm in for one hell of a weekend, safe to say. I'll close out with this. You can only tell me to go to one place. I've never been to Austin. One place. What's the one place I have to go to? If I don't make it there, the weekend won't be a success.
Listen, it's going to sound very cliche, but you got it. It's Stubbs Barbecue on Barton Creek. I mean, it's tremendous. It's an Austin staple. It's been around for forever. It's going to be the best barbecue that you find in the state of Texas, and it's right in the heart of Austin, Texas. Got to go check that out. It's worth the wait in line as well. So
not Terry Black's because that's the one I've heard about.
Listen, you can't go bad with either.
We'll follow up on this. We'll follow up on it, but
Stubbs is the one for me.
Okay, Stubbs. Okay. All right. See, this is new information. That's why I asked. CJ Vogel, one of the best in the business. Does a great job covering the Horn. CJ, always a pleasure, my friend. In case folks have been living under a rock, Texas fans tuned in, let them know where they can find all your great work.
Yeah, absolutely. On Twitter at CJVogel_OTF or on TexasFootball.com.
CJ, you're the man. Appreciate you taking the time and see you in Austin in a few days, my man.
Can't wait.